the Emperor of mankind, the champion of humanity and greatest of our species, he who like Prometheus stole fire from the gods and paid for his hubris in oceans of blood. Or so you have been told. For if the Emperor is anathema to the Ruinous Powers, why would he need their strength? For the Emperor went to the place where gods die, not for their power and succor, but rather for his own. What he needed of Chaos was not their strength, but a means to get the full access of his own. For the Emperor took a gamble and drew upon the power from his future god self, all in an effort to prevent that wretched future from becoming reality. But in the grim darkness of the far future, all that is left is the terrible laughter of thirsting gods. Alright, so why on earth would I say such a thing? Especially when I know there are many of you clamoring right now being like, hold on Brad, we have direct extra scripts about people talking about the Emperor stealing power from the Chaos Gods. So why on earth are you saying this? Or rather, how can you say this? And when it comes to that, there is one important fact that a lot of people seem to forget when consuming Warhammer 40k lore, and that is bias. A good chunk of Warhammer 40k lore is written in context of being of the bias of the faction or speaker speaking. Now, oftentimes we take whatever lore is written to be truth, but in reality it may be part truth, part hyperbolic lie made to seem the faction or chapter just look all that much more better. And as I said, that's something that a lot of people seem to forget. Now, whilst this is true for every single faction, it is especially doubly true when it comes to the powers of Chaos. Chaos are not good folks. The Chaos Gods are uncaring swine, the lot of them. They don't care about your wants, your dreams, your desires, or anything in between. All they want is for you to say yes. So they'll plot, scheme, plan, and they'll get everything they can. They don't care who, what, when, where, or why, so long as you sign on that dotted line. In other words, they're like the most honest lawyer you ever did meet. Jokes aside, the Chaos Gods are very, very, very good at manipulating people into doing what they want them to do. And more often than not, there is but a tiny little shred of truth in an ocean of lies, just enough to cloak their words in a guise of reality, when in truth, it is so far from being that. For such is the nature of chaos, vilely insidious and terribly sinister. But going back to the Emperor and the powers of chaos, the first and the most notable example we have, and the one that pretty much everyone thinks of when they think about Big E taking power from the gods, comes from Vengeful Spirit. And this is very important because the one who's saying this is Horus, and this is when he's pretty much high on the Chaos Juice 100% at this point. And this is right before he becomes Horus Ascendant, when he has the apex of chaotic influence and corruption. So to say that he's a reliable narrator and in his right senses, yeah, no, he ain't. Homie on that Chaos Day 100%. But rather than me waffling on and on and on, how about I just give you the story itself, taken from Vengeful Spirit. Don't you feel it, my sons? Don't you feel how special Molech is? How singular among all the worlds we have won it is? Axeman found himself nodding, and he saw he wasn't the only one. Lupercal walked in a circle, jabbing a fist into his palm with every sentence. At the dawn of the great diaspora, the Emperor traveled here in humble guise and found the gateway to a realm of immortal gods. He offered them things only a god in waiting could offer, and they trusted him. They gave him a measure of their power, and with that power, he wrought the science to unlock mysteries of creation. Horus was radiant as he spoke, as though he had already ascended to a divine plane of reality. But the Emperor had no intention of honoring his debt to the gods. He turned on them, taking their gifts and blending them with his genecraft to give birth to demigods. The Emperor condemns the warp as unnatural, but only so that no other dares wield it. The blood of the immaterial realm flows in my veins. It flows in all our veins. For as I am the Emperor's son, you are the sons of Horus, and the secret of our genesis was locked upon Molech. The gateway to that power is in Lupercalia, far beneath the mountain rock, sealed away from the light of a jealous god who knew that someday one of his sons would seek to surpass his deeds. And finally, Axeman understood why they had come here, why they had expended such resources, and defied all military logic to follow in the footsteps of a god. This would be the moment they rose to challenge the Emperor with the very weapons he had kept for himself. This was the apotheosis of them all. So as we can tell from that, that's not exactly a one-to-one documentation of everything that happened in chronological order. In fact, I imagine Mr. Logo would be rather proud of his brother's presentation. The emphasizing each point with a slamming of the fist is really good speech work. But again, Horus is not in his right frame of mind. Horus is not in any right frame of mind. He is consumed by the machinations of chaos. And when you consider that it was most likely the Chaos Gods who told him this, or via one of their servants, a la Erebus, again, this is unreliable at the best. We know this because Chaos lies to its servants all the time. Like I said before, Chaos doesn't care how, when, where, why. So long as they get what they want, everything else is but second guess. So now you may be saying, but hold on, Brad. Would they really lie to Horus? Isn't he supposed to be their number one avatar, their ever-chosen? Surely with him they would at least be somewhat honest. And to that, I have this to say. Like all things in chaos, there's a sliver of truth. But no one, not even the gods themselves, are above lying to each other. Besides, the Chaos Gods have lied to Horus. In fact, that's how all this happened. And it's a prime example of just how chaos works, writhing its insidious claws deep into one's psyche, taken from false gods. Horus pushed through the unresting crowds towards the center of the plaza as a terrible suspicion began forming in his gut. He caught up to Sejanus, who stood atop a set plinth at the foot of the statues, where a huge pair of bronze eagles formed the backdrop of a tall lectern. A hugely fat official in gold chasuble and tall mitre of silk and gold read aloud from a thick, leather-bound book. His words carried over the crowd via silver trumpets, held aloft by what looked like winged infants that floated above him. As Horus approached, he saw that the official was human, only from the waist up, that is. A complex series of hissing pistons and brass rods making up his lower half, and thus fusing him with the lectern, which he now saw was mounted on a wheeled base. Horus ignored him, looking up at the statues, finally seeing them for what they were. Though their faces were unrecognizable to one who knew them, such as Horus, their identities were unmistakable. The nearest was Sanguinius, his outstretched wings like the pinions of eagles that adorned every structure surrounding the plaza. To one side of the Lord of Angels was Rogal Dawn, the unfurled wings haloing his head. Unmistakable. On the other was someone who could only be Leman Russ, his hair carved to resemble a wild mane, and wearing a cloak of wolf pelts, draped around his massive shoulders. Horus encircled the statues, seeing other familiar images. Gilliman, Korax, the Lion, Ferus Manus, Vulcan, and finally, Jagatai Khan. There could be no doubting the identity of the central figure now, and Horus looked up into the carved face of the Emperor himself. No doubt the inhabitants of this world thought it magnificent, but Horus knew this was a poor thing, failing spectacularly to capture the sheer dynamism and the force that was the Emperor's personality. With the additional height offered by the statue's plinth, Horus looked out over the slowly circling mass of people and wondered what they thought they did in this place. Pilgrims, thought Horus, the word leaping unbidden into his mind. Coupled with the ostentation and vulgar adornments he saw in the surrounding buildings, Horus knew that this was not simply a place of devotion, but something much more. "This is a place of worship," he said, as Sejanus joined him at the foot of Korax's statue, the cool marble perfectly capturing the pallid complexion of his taciturn brother. Sejanus nodded. "It is an entire world given over to the praise of the Emperor." "But why? The Emperor is no god. He spent centuries freeing humanity from the shackles of religion. This makes no sense." "Not from where you stand in time, but this is the Imperium that will come to pass if events continue on their present course. The Emperor has the gift of foresight, and he has seen this future time." "For what purpose?" "To destroy the old faiths, so that one day his cult would more easily supplant them all." "No, I won't believe that. My father always refuted any notion of divinity. He once said of ancient Earth that there were torches, they who were the teachers, but also extinguishers who were the priests. He would never condone this." "This entire world is his temple, and it is not the only one." "There are more worlds like this?" "Hundreds, possibly even thousands." but the Emperor shamed Lorgar for such behavior. The Wordbearer's Legion raised great monuments to the Emperor and persecuted entire populations for the lack of faith, but the Emperor would not stand for it and said that Lorgar shamed him with such displays. He wasn't ready for worship then. He didn't have control of the galaxy. That's why he needed you. Horus turned away from Sejanus and looked up into the golden face of his father, desperate to refute the words he was hearing. At any other time, he would have struck Sejanus down for such a suggestion, but the evidence was before him. He turned to face Sejanus. These are some of my brothers, but where are the others? Where am I? I do not know. I have walked this place many times, but I have never seen your likeness. I am his chosen regent. I fought on 1,000 battlefields from him. The blood of my warriors is on his hands, and he ignores me like I don't exist. The Emperor has forsaken you, War Master. Soon he will turn his back on his people to win his place amongst the gods. He cares only for himself and his power and glory. We were all deceived. We have no place in his grand scheme, and when the time comes, he will spurn us all and ascend to godhood. While we were fighting war after war in his name, he was secretly building his power in the war. The droning cant of an official, a priest, realized Horus, continued as the pilgrims maintained the slow procession around their god, and Sejanus' words hammered against his skull. This can't be true. What does a being of the Emperor's magnitude do after he has conquered the galaxy? What is left for him but godhood? What use has he for those who he leaves behind? No! Roared Horus, stepping from the plinth and smashing the droning priest to the ground. The augmented preacher hybrid was torn from the pulpit and lay screaming in a pool of blood and oil. His cries were carried across the plaza by trumpets of the floating infants, though none of the crowd seemed inclined to help him. Horus set off into the crowded plaza in a blind fury, leaving Sejanus behind on the plinth of statues. Once again, the crowd parted before his headlong dash, as unresponsive to his leaving as they had been to his arrival. Within moments he reached the edge of the plaza and made his way down to the nearest arterial boulevards. People filled the street, but they ignored him as he pushed his way through them. Each face turned in rapture to an image of the Emperor. Without Sejanus beside him, Horus realized that he was completely alone. He heard the howl of a distant wolf, its cry once again sounding, as though it called out to him. He stopped in the center of a crowded street, listening for the wolf howl again, but it was silenced as suddenly as it come. The crowds filled around him just as he listened, and Horus saw that once again, no one paid him the slightest bit of attention. Not since Horus had parted from his father and brothers had he felt so isolated. Suddenly, he felt the pain of being confronted with the scale of his own vanity and pride, as he realized how much he thrived in the admiration of those around him. On every face, he saw the same blind devotion as he had witnessed in those circled around the statues, a beloved reverence to the man he called father. Didn't these people realize that the victories that had won their freedom had been won with his blood? It should be Horus's statue surrounded by his brother Primarchs, not the Emperor's. Horus seized the nearest devotee and shook him violently by the shoulders, shouting, "He is not a god! He is not a god!" The pilgrim's neck snapped with an audible crack as Horus felt the bones of the man's shoulders splinter beneath his iron grip. Horrified, he dropped the dead man and ran deeper into the labyrinth of the shrine world, taking turns at random, as though he sought to lose himself in its crowded streets. Each fervent change of direction took him along the thronged avenues and worshippers and marvels dedicated to the glory of the God Emperor. Thoroughfares where every cobblestone was inscribed with a prayer, kilometer-high ossuaries of gold-plated bones, and forests of marble columns with unnumbered saints depicted upon them. Random demagogues roamed the streets, one fanatically mortifying his flesh with prayer whips, while another held up 2 squares of orange cloth by the corners and screamed that he would not wear them. Horus could make no sense of it. Vast prayer ships drifted over this part of the shrine city, monstrous bloated zeppelins with sweeping brass sails and enormous prop-driven motors. Long prayer banners hung from their fat silver hulls, and hymns blurred from hanging loudspeakers shaped like ebony skulls. Horus passed the great mausoleum, where flocks of ivory-skinned angels with brass-feathered wings flew from dark archways and descended into the crowds gathered in front of the building. The solemn angels swooped over the wailing masses, the cries of adoration and praise that followed each supplicant as he was carried through the dread portals of the mausoleum by these winged creatures. Horus saw death venerated in the colored glass of every window, celebrated in the carvings on every door, and revered in the funeral dirges that echoed from the trumpets of winged children, who giggled as they circled like birds of prey. Flapping banners of bones clattered, and wind whistled through the eye sockets of skulls set into shrine caskets on bronze poles. Morbidity hung like a shroud upon this world, and Horus could not reconcile the dark Gothic solemnity of this new religion with the dynamic force of truth, reason, and confidence that had driven the Great Crusade into the stars. High temples and grim shrines passed him in a blur. Xenobites and preachers, how grueling the pilgrims from every street corner to the peal of doomsayers' bells. Everywhere where Horus looked, he saw walls adorned with frescoes, paintings, and bas-relief works of familiar faces, his brothers, and the Emperor himself. Yet why? Why was there no representation of Horus? It was as if he had never existed. He sank to his knees, raising his fist to the sky. "Father, why have you forsaken me?" So aside from realizing that passage is absolutely amazing, seriously, if you guys haven't read the first 3 books of the Horus Heresy, make sure you do it. Horus Rising, False Gods, and Galaxy in Flames, just such good books, man. But from here we see that the Chaos Gods via Erebus manipulated Horus plumb sink. He was like a bloody marionette puppet dancing to the tone of their string pulls. And to be fair, Chaos did show him the truth. If things went along their current course, this was indeed the future that awaited Horus. However, he did fail to mention a very few important things, like how the reason why there was no Horus or any other of his brothers is because they turned traitor and nearly killed the Emperor, how said course involved the Horus Heresy, and how the gods wanted him to become the Dark King. Also, this wasn't Sejanus. This was in fact Erebus in guise of Sejanus. And that is chaos. Lie, 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 and lies. Yet all wrapped in a decadent blanket of succulent truth. Just enough so that you can believe, but not nearly enough for you to realize the folly in their words. The perfect poison, self-destruction incarnate. That is the gods of chaos. And whilst Horus may be the greatest example, he is certainly not their only victim. As long as chaos has existed, it's been lying to people and duping them into doing their duty in their own will, and that often ends in disaster for the followers. So yeah, chaos lies. Chaos lies like a lot. So there's a pretty good chance that Chaos lied exactly about the Emperor coming to them for power. But them lying is only one part of it. The other part is that the Emperor didn't really need that power. The Emperor is a perpetual, yes, but he's also a psyker. He is the greatest psyker humanity has ever known. He is something so totally, completely, and utterly different. But the thing is though, the Emperor has always been like this. Psykers draw their power from the roiling currents of the warp. The Emperor has always been a psyker, therefore, he's always been able to draw on power from the warp. Now at this point some of you may argue, oh right, but he got that power from chaos, that's how he's able to use it. Not so. Every single record we have of the Emperor before 30k, before the Age of Strife, shows him acting in some way and acting in powers that are absolutely insane. The most notable example being when he fought the Void Dragon. The Emperor was able to slay the Void Dragon, subdue him, and then implant him underneath the bowels of Mars itself, circa 10th century our modern time. By the way, in 40k the Emperor is St. George, and that's where that whole story comes from. The Emperor was a strong enough psychic entity to do all that, travel via space, and plop him right smack bang underneath Mars before he ever met the Chaos Gods. Now while a shot of the Void Dragon ain't exactly a Chaos God, it's pretty close, especially when you consider if he was a whole Void Dragon rather than just a shard. But, you know, to be fair, we can say that that's probably a very strong Greater Demon. But even then, the ability for Biggie to use his normal powers to smack up what is basically a super strong Greater Demon, like a first Greater Demon. But there are 2 more damning examples that we have to look at. The first is when the Emperor finally enters into the War for the Webway. The demons scream at him and call him the Anathema. So generally speaking, if you know 40k, you should know what the word Anathema means. But just in case you don't, Anathema means the antithesis of, the exact opposite, something that can't comprehend. It's the literal exact negative. Think about it like matter and antimatter. The demons are calling the Emperor the exact opposite of them. If the Emperor got his powers from Chaos, how would it then that these powers would be the opposite of Chaos powers? It doesn't make any sense. Power is power. It can be used, but it can't be changed. That's why you can't take a demonic entity and transform it into a good entity. Again, think about Castellan Crow. He has the Black Blade with him, and it's got that demon inside it. It's not a case that, oh, I can just make this demon good. It's a case that this power exists and I have to control it. Simple as. It's the same way with the Emperor. The second example comes from The End in the Depth Volume 1, and this is Malcado talking about the Emperor and just how powerful he really is. You have brought the Emperor face to face with Chaos first found, closer than when he sat upon the throne, or walked the shrieking halls of the webway, perhaps closer even than when he last faced the Four, and took the fire from them on Molech. You have brought Chaos to his very door, and forced him to look it in the eye. Do not then expect him to not use it. I see him look down at his hands. They are sheathed in ormite, because it is almost quantum inert, and thus most efficacious in the manipulation of immaterial forces. Their skin is better. He knows this. He tears his right gauntlet off, hangs it from his harness, and seizes the immaterium with bare hand and bared mind. It is scalding and alive with anger. But my lord is no longer constrained by the constant duties of the throne. That is my burden now. There is no time. There are no clocks. There is no pain. My master only hears the crackle of the warp. I watch as he harnesses the sound and uses it as a focus, a dristi, to regulate his work. The immaterial presses at him. It seeks to overwhelm him and drain him, but he understands its fire. It is the same fire he stole from the Four Annihilators and used to keep them at bay. The same fire he has wielded for centuries to drive them back whenever they come too close. They flinch then from their own fire. They flinch now. You have forced this confrontation first found. You have brought my lord into a realm of chaos to face you. Did you think that would weaken him and grind him down? How can he grow weak when there is limitless power around him to draw upon? You do not put out fire by throwing fuel upon it. He draws upon your flames. Over the millennia he has worn many masks, each suitable to the task at hand. His mind, his greatest gift, allows him flexibility in such things. Now you see him at his truest aspect, as terrible as he can be, when terror is the only recourse. He is Ordo ab Chao. He is Lux in Tenebris. Alright, before you start pointing fingers and look at me all cross-eyed, I know what the excerpt says, but hear me out. Yes, Malcolm does says, and he took the fire from them on Molech specifically. Now all of you may be saying, okay, hold on, case closed, Brad. All this point has been moot now. Look here, this is what it says, right? But here's the thing. It says he took their fire from them on Molech. Fire could refer to anything. It doesn't necessarily mean their power. Rather, it means the warp power. And since the beings of chaos are pure warp entities, the warp is everything. But they are not the warp. Again, it says it very clearly. In the same script, this is the same fire that he has wielded for centuries to drive them back whenever they have come close. Now again, you may be saying, Brad, why on earth would you include this? Clearly this disproves your whole theory. This is pointless, you're grasping at straws, this was on clickbait. Why on earth would you include this? This is pointless, this is a waste of time. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is when we get to the crux of it. Whilst at first glance it may seem that this exoscript disproves my theory, in reality, it supports it all the more. Again, the word fire is used. I mentioned earlier in my intro, we're comparing Big E to Prometheus, the giant who stole fire from the gods. But fire was not power. Fire there represented the ability to evolve. It represented the ability to cook food, the ability to light the way during night. It represented a means to an end. Again, the Emperor was always a psyker. He could always draw on powers of the warp. But what he lacked was the means to manipulate it. More specifically, what the warp is. There is no time, there are no clocks, there is no pain. He only hears the crackle of the warp. The Emperor grabs the warp bare hand and he manipulates it. As I said before, the gods of chaos are entirely made of the warp, but the warp is not entirely them. When Malkador is referring to the term fire, it is not referring to power, it refers to a means by which to manipulate said power. But what on earth could the Emperor need to manipulate? He's a Psyker, isn't he? A very powerful Psyker. He can do anything. So what on earth would he need that primordial beings of chaos could give him that he couldn't just outright take? And that is time. The Emperor is still mortal. He is still bound to this mortal coil. Whilst he may be free from its death, he is still bound to this realm. Unlike the gods of chaos. The gods of chaos are made of the warp. The warp is timeless. There is no end, there is no beginning. It is stated specifically that you're the chaos gods. Sunesh has always been with them, but has just been born yesterday as well. The concept of time does not exist in the warp. And since the chaos gods are beings of the total warp, it does not exist for them. But whereas the Emperor may be as powerful as them, he still lives in our mortal coil, and thus he is still at the whims of time. That's why specifically when Malkador first speaks about the warp, he says that there is no time. There are no clocks. There is a reason for that, because that is the main difference between the primordial annihilators and the Emperor. Time. Alright, so Big E went to the gods for time, because it's the one thing that they had control over that he didn't. But why? Why on earth would the Emperor make a deal with literal devils for time? And that's because every single thing Big E has ever done has always been with time. Time has been his greatest enemy, forever and always. And then we come to Big E's great goal, the whole reason why he started the Great Crusade, and that is what he fears for humanity, taken from Master of Mankind. Everything that has happened will happen again. It is the way of things. Yet humanity's death will eclipse the Elder's annihilation tenfold, for we are evolving into a far more psychically powerful race. Uncontrolled psychic energy will tear apart reality. The warp entities will feed on the carcass of the galaxy. There must be control, and control must be maintained. And there we come to the big bang of it all. Humanity right now is on the path of the Eldari. We are so incredibly psychically tuned and gifted that eventually, if there is no regulation, if no one tries to put everything in order, we will create another psychic awakening. There will be another death of the universe, and the birth of something altogether far more evil. The Emperor realized this. Thus, he would enact his Great Crusade to restore humanity under one banner, that banner that would defy the Chaos Gods. There will be no worship of them, there will be no mention of them. The Emperor would maintain this facade long enough to secure and sequester away humanity in the webway, a place where humanity would be untouched from the clutches of chaos, a place where humanity could be safe, but more importantly, a place where the Emperor could be safe. But why on earth would the Emperor want to be safe? Because, ladies and gentlemen, we have a saying in South Africa, nix for mahala, there is nothing for free. Valdor and the Emperor say as much, taken from Valdor, birth of the Imperium. There is a grand bargain here. I understand it. Do you? Already? Good. Very good. What is the bargain? Infinite power cannot be overcome. We are finite, limited by law. So, deception. Do you find that unworthy? No. Because it comes from me? Yes. Speak freely. For once, speak freely. You are only just awakened. There may be a few chances left for you. You will cheat them. You will cheat all of them. And us. A risky strategy. There are no others. You understand it all. Then tell me, do you understand the full implication? Ruin. Total ruin. And lo and behold, ladies and gentlemen, there we are. The Emperor, right now, is on a time crunch. He needs to get humanity built up into the webway, he needs to get us sequestered, locked up, and evolved full on moving forward despite all the nonsense of 30,000 years before we reach our psychic awakening. And when you consider how powerful some human psychics can be, that psychic awakening is getting pretty close. But time always has and always will be the Emperor's greatest weakness. One weakness that the Chaos Gods do not have. Hell, they don't even know time exists to a certain degree. Before we continue, let's recap what we have. The Emperor went to Molech to the Chaos Gods in exchange for some control of time, or to penetrate the veils of time. The reason why is because we know he was on a time crunch. But why would the Chaos Gods help him? What did he give to them that no other one could give? Or as Horus puts it, what did he give that only a god in waiting could give? And the answer is himself. The Emperor struck a bargain. That bargain was this. He would gain the ability to pierce the veils of time, to perceive the future and to draw power from it. In exchange, he would join the Great Game. He would become the 5th Chaos God. In essence, he lied to the Chaos Powers. If humanity continued on its current path, it would develop another Chaos God. And as the Emperor put it, chaos would feast upon the rotten carcass of the Imperium and the galaxy as a whole. So Big E went to the Chaos Gods and he spun them a tale. Give me this power, and I shall join your ranks. I will continue the Great Game, but on my own terms. The Chaos Gods, as we know, they don't care for much, only that the Great Game continues. The vicious cycle of life and death be maintained. The status quo remained propubellum. But how could the Emperor turn to a Chaos God, I hear you ask? Quite simply, if you consume enough negative energy from the warp, you will be transformed into a demon of it. Or in the Emperor's case, a god, the Dark King, taken from The End and the Death, Part 2. The Dark King is not the apotheosis of Horus Lupercal. The sorcerer points a bony finger at the last two cards, the Emperor and the Dark King. They're identical. Fate is confounded. Your Emperor is the Dark King. The warp. He has drunk of the warp. He has drawn on its power to fight chaos, but he has drunk too much and too deeply. It has made him thus. It has made him the very thing he resolved to stop. A god. That is what he is in the process of becoming. And when you put that into context, it all makes sense. Big E was supposed to become the Dark King. He was supposed to join the Great Game. He reneged on that decision. Thus he cheated the Chaos Gods. The gods, infuriated, decided to use their servants to gain the next best thing, his son. And thus this was their plan. Horus would become ascendant and challenge the Emperor. Either he would kill his father and become the new Dark King, or the Emperor would kill him using the powers of the warp. Such power, radiated in such a negative manner, would transfix him into the Dark King proper. Because just like in a casino, the house always wins. So too when it comes to anything regarding the warp, chaos always wins. But before we get to revealing this theory proper, let's go over everything we know. Number 1. Chaos, as always, does not care about you. It does not care about your goals. It simply cares that you fulfill its wishes. Each and every one of the Chaos Gods will lie to your face, but not straight up blatantly lie. Even corn is not that blunt. Rather, they will lace the lie in a decadent veil of truth, so that when you taste it, the sweetness of the truth will move you to tears before the bitter center is revealed, and you realize the truth was anything but, and you find yourself too late to stop, as you are a fool dancing on the myriad strings of the gods of chaos. Number 2. Big E was always a psyker. He always had some control of the warp. He always had power over the warp, and thus he was anathema to the Chaos Gods. All this combined meaning that the Emperor could not cooperate with their power. As we've established, you can't change power, you can't change matter. It's one thing. Therefore, it doesn't make any sense if the Emperor used the same power of the Chaos Gods the same power, their power specifically, that he would be called the Anathema. And whilst many people believe that when people talk about the Emperor stole fire from the Chaos Gods, he means their power, he doesn't mean their power. He means the powers of the warp. Because remember, the Chaos Gods may be of the warp, but they are not the warp. Therefore, the power that the Emperor took from them would be the one thing that he couldn't control in the mortal realm. Time. And that leads us to number 3. Big E needed time to do everything. Time was his greatest enemy. He was rushing to prevent humanity from reaching that apex apotheosis where we would spawn a Dark King naturally. He wanted to prevent all this from happening by ushering us into the webway, thus protecting us and himself from the wrath retribution of chaos, whom the Emperor had scorned and lied to. And then that leads us to number 4. The Chaos Gods were promised by the Emperor the one thing that a god in waiting could give them, that being himself. He promised that he would become the Dark King. He would add the entirety of humanity to the Great Game and continue the vicious cycle. But he lied. He lied to them, he lied to us, he lied to everyone, save perhaps for Malkador himself. And ladies and gentlemen, we come to our final conclusion, and what I truly believe happened to the Emperor on Moloch. Big E traveled to Moloch to petition the Chaos Gods not for their power specifically, but rather for the one power of the warp that he could not manipulate, time. He petitioned the Chaos Gods to allow him to bypass time, to gaze into the future, to then draw on the power from his future self and to see what was happening there. In exchange, he would join the Great Game. He would become the Dark King, and he would promise the entirety of humanity as succor unto the Great Chaos Gods. But the Emperor lied to them. He never planned to do any of that. But then that begs the question, what was the Emperor's plan? The Emperor's plan was simple, and it fits within his character. The Emperor bet on himself. He wagered that he would see the future, the good and the bad, and what would happen. When he saw what would happen, he would then change it. He would work, manipulate, and act in a way to bring about the ruin of chaos, preventing that future from ever coming to pass. He would draw upon the strength of his future self by seeing everything that happened and planning around it. He would take the chance, and he would gamble with the fate of humanity and his own soul on himself. And that would explain how the Emperor acted. That would explain how he always knew what to say, how he always knew what to do, how when it came to the loyalist Primarchs he treated them well, but when it came to the traitor Primarchs, he often shows a disinterest. Angron and Lorgar being the perfect examples. He could have handled them better, he could have handled them differently, but he knew the future. So, he simply just decided that he would let it play out. Why bother wasting time on sons who would eventually turn against him? The Emperor believed that he could outmaneuver the Chaos Gods. He believed that he was smarter than them. He believed that the only way that humanity could survive the Chaos Gods was to beat them at their own game. He would be the one to do that. He would be the one to change everything, for he was the only one who could. But like I said before, the house always wins. And when it comes to the games of the warp, chaos is the biggest casino that there is. Perhaps the Chaos Gods knew this. Perhaps they knew that the Emperor would try this. Perhaps they knew that it would be his hubris that would lead him onto this path. Perhaps they guaranteed on this. Perhaps they knew that they couldn't beat the Emperor in a straight-up 1v1. Perhaps they knew that the only one who could defeat the Emperor truly was his own bloody hubris and arrogance. Perhaps they allowed the Emperor to see into the future, knowing that his arrogance would cause him to fuck everything up royally. Perhaps maybe that's where they got the idea to do that to Horus. Perhaps because they had already done it with the Emperor first. And the Emperor, believing himself ever so smart, fell into the clutches of chaos. Because like I said, the Chaos Gods do not care about how, what, when, where, or why. All they care is that you do their doing, and you complete their bidding. They will show you anything and everything, but whatever they show you will always be a lie, wrapped in the sweetest coverings of a minor truth. They will wait for you to eat it, and for you to slowly poison yourself. Chaos will not be the one to pull the trigger, but they'll be the one to offer you the gun on a silver platter. For as great and as mighty as the Emperor may be, he's still human, and humans are the favorite feast of the Ruinous Powers. For as I said, in the grim darkness of the far future, there is naught but the laughing of thirsting gods. And in the end, I suppose the Emperor did keep up to his end of his bargain, for he too is now a god, and his skeletal cackle can be heard across the entire width and breadth of his necromantic kingdom, because glory to the God Emperor of all mankind. But yeah, thank you guys also very much for watching. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. This was a really fun theory for me to come up with because it's something that it seems very cut and dry, especially if you read The End of the Death and they mention specifically that the Emperor stole fire from the Chaos Gods. And if you interpret fire just purely as it being power, yeah, it can. But again, I really think that the Emperor being anathema rules that out. And again, also, fire does not necessarily mean power. It could also mean a means to an end. And when you put the theory in the broader scale of things, a lot of the Emperor's weird theories and questions and his suggestions and his decisions, they all make a great deal of sense. So with this, I think I really did find the right sweet spot. But hey, let me know if you guys agree, let me know if you guys disagree. Is there an extra script that I missed? Is there something that you think guys just really just posted on the water? And do you guys think that I hit the money? Love to hear your thoughts down below. But ladies and gentlemen, I want to say a massive thank you guys for watching, and even more massive thank you to my awesome members and Patreons. Massive shout out to my Lieutenant tier members, Mr. Curtis Studies, Mr. Eddie V3, and Miss Majora of the Void. Massive shout out to the good old NCOs of the Sergeants, with Mr. Damiak, Mr. Andy McGee, Mr. Mooresmith.Fireheart, Mr. Sean IRL7, Mr. Bullwin, and Mr. Matthew Merrill. Big shout out to my corporal tier members, with Mr. Tremeo the Math Kitty, Mr. Lord Rosarius, Miss Shauna Smithers, Mr. Tech Priest Toaster, Mr. Gentle Salamander, Mr. Rambling Hamster, and the Wench of Warhammer. And finally, but certainly not least, the awesome privateer, with Mr. Thomas Oslons, Mr. Ivan_SBW, Mr. Michael Aeda, Mr. Monkey Man, Mr. Diego Castro, Mr. CMD Neo, Mr. Fortress Unum, Mr. Dalmaric, Eric Massaro, and Mr. Weaselhack. Thank y'all. I love y'all. I appreciate y'all. You're amazing. You're awesome. You're beautiful and wonderful. So sign up today with our memberships, ladies and gentlemen. You gain a bunch of awesome benefits, early access videos, behind the scenes stuff, member only content, and most of all, you get to help with the channel and help me get these videos out. These videos are not easy to make. I gotta do a lot of stuff that I have to do to make sure that these videos do well and that I put together something halfway decent for y'all to enjoy. So anything that you can do would be much appreciated. But remember, this will always be free, so whether you give your boy $1 or not, I would love you, just the same. Mwah! But ladies and gentlemen, I've been the General Bradley 101, you've been beautiful, awesome, amazing people. Thank you all so very much for watching. Y'all much as the Lord there, boys and gals. And I will catch y'all next time. Dismiss, Rangers! Hey, I'm not gonna lie, when I first read that excerpt from End of the Death, I was like, nah bro, my shit cooked. But I'm glad I didn't give up on it. Did some more research and I was able to put together a very convincing argument. I hope. Hey, it could just end up being shit.